The resolution of the DUC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
He called you to be different. He called you to be a non-conformist.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hello, I'm David DeBusk, and today I'm coming to you from Texas. Friends, first of all, I want to thank all of you who are faithful subscribers to my channel. And if this is your first time here, I would like to invite you to become part of our growing family by hitting that subscribe button. And if you like this video, please, I'd appreciate it if you'd give it a thumbs up. I ask you to do these things for one simple reason. It helps to push the algorithms that are used by YouTube and Google in recommending our videos to others who are searching for content. And by doing this, you are literally helping me to spread the truth that is found in Scripture to other people all around the world. On another note, I want to caution you to be very careful and examine everything that you hear. You may not realize this, but many social media platforms are shadow banning, censoring, and demonetizing conservative and religious content. In addition, these platforms are systematically removing subscribers. Ultimately, the goal is to have everyone on the same page, I guess, and believing whatever they're being told. Keep in mind that Scripture affirms that Satan is the god of this world. His schemes and manipulations are becoming more and more apparent. And beware, because if you're not careful, you may unintentionally find yourself playing on the wrong team. It's so bad that Yeshua warns us that if it were possible, the very elect would be deceived. Now, this brings me to today's video. It examines the dangers of human traditions. Allow me to emphasize that these things indeed appear to have in them a word of wisdom in the appearance of humility and in the worship of God. But trust me, they are nothing more than dried up fig leaves that will expose one as wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. A little over 11 years ago, I found myself at a spiritual crossroads. One road held divine and sacred the commandments, decrees, and the ordinances of God, while the other embraced change and substitution. The latter is by far the most popular because it is adorned with an array of beautifully designed churches and cathedrals, stained glass, spiritual songs, and holiday celebrations. This crossroads was the very center of contradiction between divine authority and human tradition. I found myself asking, if Yahweh commanded His people to do one thing, then why are so many doing something else? Yahweh commanded His people, for instance, to keep the seventh day holy. Yet the vast majority venerate the first day of the week. He commanded that His people observe His festivals, yet professing Christians celebrate holidays associated with pagan customs and celebrations. He commanded His people to abstain from eating things that are not food, things that He designated to be unclean. Yet the Christian church has declared that which is not food to be food. Did the unchangeable Elohim, the God of heaven and earth, make these eternal decrees and then change His mind? Does the love and the grace of Elohim absolve His people from their responsibility? Such questions drove me to my knees, and it lifted my head, and I cast my eyes toward heaven, asking Yahweh if He would help me to separate truth from fiction, light from darkness, and life from death. That day was a defining moment in my life, for I found myself digging deep into the underlying Hebrew and Greek manuscripts of the Bible. I began to look at words and the multiple ways that they are defined, used, and translated in the various versions of the Bible. I began to look at capitalization, inserted prepositions, conjunctions, punctuation, added text, and the textual variants as set forth in various manuscripts such as the Septuagint, the Aramaic translations, the Latin Vulgate, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. I began to see glimpses of translator bias regarding their choice of both punctuation and words. For instance, the insertion of the conjunction but would lead one to believe in an exception or something other than, while the insertion of the conjunction because would lead one to believe in acceptance or the reason for. The mere selection and insertion of something as simple as a conjunction could change the meaning completely and give way to the translator's personal beliefs. Each contradiction raises a very simple question. Are you going to trust God, or are you going to embrace accepted tradition based upon the understanding and opinion of fallen man? I've come to believe that the Christian church, for the most part, has made a huge mistake. Rather than seeking ways to obey God's commandments, professing Christians have sought ways to defy and excuse their transgression. Simply put, most so-called Christians contend that belief is the justification for their lack of obedience, rather than the reason for it. Whether you realize this or not, you too stand at this crossroads. Do you trust God? And do you believe that he said what he said and that he meant what he said? Or do you believe that the traditions of men override the things that he has decreed? It is so interesting to see people who take one verse out of the Bible and use it as support for what they believe, while ignoring so many others. 2 Thessalonians 2:15 is such a verse. The King James reads, "Therefore, brethren, stand fast and hold the traditions which you have been taught, whether by word or our epistle." Many versions of the Bible translate the Greek word paradisis as tradition, such as the American Standard Version, the Christian Standard Version, the English Standard Version, even the New King James, the New Revised Standard Version, the Revised Standard Version, etc. Now, make no mistake, what Paul is saying in this text is very important. He emphasizes that the followers of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, are to stand fast and guard the traditions that they've been taught. But what traditions? What was Paul reminding Christians to do, to observe the oral rules and the regulations of the Jewish sages and rabbis, or to observe days and festivals that are established by the church rather than those that are decreed by God? Or was he advocating a teaching that it's permissible to eat things that God had from the very beginning declared to be unclean and not fit for human consumption? What on earth was Paul saying? Well, you may be surprised to learn that there are other versions of the Bible that chose to translate that word paradisias differently. For instance, both Darby in the Geneva Bible uses the word instructions. The Evangelical Heritage version, the J.B. Phillips edition, the New International Version, the New Living Translation, and the Voice, they use the word teachings. And then there's the Living Bible that uses the word truth, and the New Matthew's Bible uses the word ordinances, to keep the ordinances that they had been taught. This may come as a surprise to many of you, but the words instructions, ordinances, teachings, truth, these are all used as synonyms for the Torah, the law of God. But this gets even more interesting as you look at other versions of the Bible and the New Testament that are based on the ancient Aramaic manuscripts. It was the A.J. Holman Company that published the Holy Bible from the ancient Eastern text that was translated by George M. Lamsa. This translation of the Old and New Testaments is based on Peshitta manuscripts, which have comprised the accepted Bible of all those Christians who have used Syriac as their language of prayer and worship for many centuries. The Church of the East and some noted Western scholars dispute the belief of modern scholarship that the originals of the four Gospels and other parts of the New Testament were written in Greek. In any case, Aramaic speech is an underlying factor, and New Testament writers drew on documents written in Aramaic. Syriac is the literary dialect of Aramaic. From the Mediterranean east into India, the Peshitta is still the Bible of preference among Christians. George M. Lamsa, the translator, devoted the major part of his life to this work. He was an Assyrian and a native of ancient Bible lands. He and his people retained biblical customs and Semitic culture which had perished elsewhere. With this background and his knowledge of the Aramaic, the Syriac language, he has recovered much of the meaning that has been lost in other translations of the Scripture. There is a section on the problems of translating from the Aramaic to the Greek. They go on to say that the manuscripts used were the Codex Ambrosianus for the Old Testament and the Mortimer Macaulay manuscript for the New Testament. Comparisons have been made with other Peshitta manuscripts, including the oldest dated manuscript in existence. The term Peshitta simply means straight, simple, sincere, and true. That is, the original. Even the Muslims in the Middle East accept and revere the Peshitta text. Now take a look at how George Lamsa translated 2 Thessalonians 2:15. He states, "Henceforth, my brethren, stand fast and hold to the commandments which you have been taught, either by word or by our epistle." Several years ago, a dear lady by the name of Janet M. Maggietta, who was inspired by the work of George Lamsa, undertook the task of doing her own New Testament translation of the Aramaic Peshitta. The text used in this translation as the base text is taken from the Syriac New Testament and Psalms that was published by the United Bible Societies. In 1905, the British and Foreign Bible Society published an edition of the Peshitta, reprinted by the permission from a critical edition prepared by Reverend G. H. Willem in 1901. This is a critical text of the Peshitta, meaning that it is a composite of readings from different manuscripts that were located in the British Museum. It is known as a Western text of the Peshitta, and it varies only to a small degree from other Eastern versions of the Peshitta. In her translation of 2 Thessalonians 2:15, she states, "Therefore, my brothers, stand fast and hold firmly to the commandments that you learned, whether by word or by our letter." And then there's the Aramaic New Testament that was translated by a renowned Aramaic scholar by the name of Andrew Gabriel Roth. He based his translation on the ancient Khabouris Codex manuscript. His translation of 2 Thessalonians 2:15 states, "Therefore, my brothers, be established and persevere in the commandments which you have been taught, whether by word or by our epistle." Also, there's the Aramaic New Testament that was translated by Victor Alexander. His translation was based on the ancient Aramaic New Testament scriptures of the ancient Church of the East. His translation of 2 Thessalonians 2:15 states, "Therefore, brethren, stand firm in the commandments that you have learned and uphold them, whether by manifestation or through our letter." Also, there is the Aramaic translation of the entire Bible entitled the Ancient Roots Translinear Bible that was translated by A. Francis Werner. The base manuscript is the Aramaic Peshitta text supported by the Apostolic Catholic Assyrian Church of the East, with exception to 2 Peter, 2 John, 3 John, Jude, and Revelation, which were not included in the Peshitta manuscripts. She translates 2 Thessalonians 2:15, stating that, "So, my brothers, stand and persevere in the commands that you learned, if by the word and if by my own letters." It seems as though the church is deaf and completely have forgotten the harsh words that were spoken to the Pharisees by Yeshua. In Mark 7, verses 6 through 8, he states, he said to them, "Isaiah prophesied correctly about you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men. For you left the commandments of God and are holding fast to human traditions." Let me repeat that. Yeshua excoriated those Pharisees, stating, "You left the commandments of God, and you are holding fast to human tradition." Now, you may find this interesting. The Living Bible does an excellent job rendering the text of Mark 7, 6 through 8 by stating, Jesus replied, "You bunch of hypocrites. Isaiah the prophet describes you very well when he said, 'These people speak very prettily about the Lord, but they have no love for him at all. Their worship is a farce, for they claim that God commands the people to obey their petty rules. How right Isaiah was, for you ignore God's specific orders and you substitute your own traditions." Listen carefully to what I'm about to say. It was on the night that Yeshua was betrayed. Earlier in that evening, during the Passover meal, he turned to his disciples and he said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." It is as though the Christian church didn't hear a word Yeshua said. For they've exchanged the loving decrees and commandments of God for celebrating and keeping all kinds of false doctrine. Rather than venerating the seventh day of the week, the Sabbath, they venerate the first day of the week, Sunday. Some believe in purgatory and the payment of indulgences. Others believe in the worship of Mary, the celebration of Palm Sunday, Lent, Easter, and Christmas. Some believe in apostolic succession. Others believe in amillennialism and the prosperity gospel. For crying out loud, the church has built its foundation on sinking sand of human tradition. Well, you may be asking, well, what is wrong with human tradition? Well, to put it bluntly, Yahweh never gave humanity the authority to institute man-made rules or ordinances. He makes the rules, not you. You're not God. He is. Well, then you say, well, what about grace? Well, we read in Genesis chapter 6, verse 8, that Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh. But then we read in verse 23, it states, thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. Noah did everything that God commanded him to do. I cannot even begin to tell you how many conversations that I have had with individuals who looked at me and said, well, I'm okay. I believe in Jesus. It is as though they never read the words of James when he said, faith without works is dead. Or they haven't read the words of John when he said, hereby we know that we know him if we keep his commandments. Folks, it's not like we're not being told. In Proverbs 14:12, it states very plainly that there is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Folks, we read in the book of Isaiah, chapter 5, verse 20, where he said, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Now get this. In the book of Romans, Paul tells us that the law is holy and that the commandment is holy and just and good. Then in Proverbs, we're told that the commandment is a lamp and the law is light, and reproofs and instruction are the way of life. And then in the Psalms 119, we read, how sweet are thy words unto my taste, yea, sweeter than honey to my mouth. Folks, when Isaiah condemned those by saying, woe unto them that call evil, which is lawlessness, good, and good evil, but put darkness for light, and light for darkness, and put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. The good, the light, and the sweet refer to the Torah, the law of God. It has been almost 2,500 years since Nehemiah walked upon this earth, and even so, the words that he spoke still echo through time as a witness against this generation. He stated, and then they defied you. They rebelled. They cast your Torah, the law, behind their back. They killed your prophets who admonished them to turn back to you. They committed great insulting provocations. In the book of Revelation, we read about the letters that were to be sent to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. The 7th and the last church mentioned is the church of Laodicea. This church is a prophetic description of the churches at the end of the age, and it is a fit description of falsehood masquerading as truth. In that letter it states, you say, I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing. And you do not know, that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. Well, here's one big problem. You do not know.